It's time for mock draft 3.0. Actually, don't know what the decimals mean, but we'll continue to roll with that. In this mock, we're going 4 rounds with trades, and as always, it's going to be a what I would do mock draft. I'm not a sources guy. If I were to try to do a predictive mock draft at this point, it would just be me taking Daniel Jeremiah and Dane Brugler's mock drafts and kind of combining them into one. So there's plenty of other places you can go to find out what's going to happen. This is just how I view the class in the format of a mock draft. But the one exception to that is going to be the first overall pick. I'm going with Caleb Williams to the Chicago Bears. I do have Drake May as my quarterback one, but it's razor thin between those two. I essentially have the same grade, and then I changed the decimal places so I'm not fence sitting. And since it seems like a foregone conclusion that that's what's going to happen, I'll just go ahead and plug in Caleb Williams first overall. But I really like everything about Caleb Williams, except he doesn't have elite size. We didn't get to see as many examples of him operating within structure in USC's offense. Part of that's based on the way the offense was designed, and he also has a tendency to play Superman, which has to do with his aggressive play style, but also the fact that USC was perpetually down 42-35, it seemed like. And then he fumbles constantly, which is something I'm going to keep repeating because I feel like it's not getting discussed enough. But 33 career fumbles, 16 fumbles last year, that's just a guaranteed possession that you lose every single game with Caleb Williams as your quarterback. So I'm not trying to be super negative about the first overall pick. It's just, I feel like he's talked about like he's this no-brainer, generational prospect, and I think he's maybe a step below that. But he is an elite deep passer. He's the most creative quarterback out of structure that I've ever evaluated at the college level. He's accurate. He's got a quick release. He's the epitome of arm elasticity, meaning he can release the ball from any platform, any difficult angle. And when he does sit in the pocket and run more NFL-style concepts, he's a good processor. He's comfortable throwing over the middle of the field. I think he has it in him to be a pocket passer in the NFL. So Caleb Williams and Drake May, I think, are both great prospects. I've had this grading scale for 3 years, and they're by far my 2 highest graded prospects. I wasn't watching as much tape back in the Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence drafts, but they would be right up there with those guys. And then I'm going to trade Justin Fields to the Raiders for pick 45. I think Fields is kind of a volatile, good quarterback. He has plenty of upside, but some of the slow processing that we still see at this point in his career is kind of concerning to me, and so it's hard for me to justify giving more than a second-round pick for him. But the Bears are going to recoup some draft capital by trading Justin Fields. And then at pick 2, I'm going Drake May to the Washington Commanders, who, like I said, is my top-ranked player in this class. He's a player that seems to be slightly lower on NFL teams boards than I would have expected, and I get the concerns with ball placement. I think his accuracy in 2023 left a lot to be desired, and then he finished last season with the 2 worst games that I've ever seen him play. I've watched every game from the past 2 years. So those final 2 games against Clemson and NC State, that's what even has me considering taking Caleb Williams over him. But there's no one in this class that operates the middle of the field like Drake May. He's got a really strong arm. He can throw it with zip, and he can put touch on it. He's a really good athlete. Even though the decision making can be a little bit reckless, he's a quick processor. And comparing his over aggressiveness to Caleb Williams, I would say it's pretty much a wash. At 3rd overall, we've got the Patriots. In my last mock draft, I gave them Jayden Daniels. The more I think about it, I don't really want to put Jayden Daniels behind this offensive line, throwing to this group of receivers. Everybody wants to fix their team in one offseason. I just don't think it's really possible with New England. So I'm just going to start whoever at quarterback this year, invest in the surrounding core, and take Marvin Harrison Jr. out of Ohio State. He's got some focus drops. He doesn't give you much after the catch, but outside of that, it's hard to find that many issues with Marvin Harrison Jr. as a prospect. The route running fluidity at his size, you just don't find in every class. I think last year he would have been worth the first overall pick. At 4, we've got the Arizona Cardinals. I've been going with Marvin Harrison Jr. in every mock draft, but he's off the board, so we're going to upgrade at left tackle and take Joe Alt out of Notre Dame. DJ Humphries is fine, but he's kind of old, and they can save $16 million if they cut him post June 1st. And you take Joe Alt, you've got him on the left side, Paris Johnson Jr. at right tackle. That's a nasty tackle duo for the future. Kind of a tall player to have playing in front of Kyler Murray, but you're going to have to live with that. And then the Chargers are picking at 5. I'm going to have the Falcons trade up and send a future first-round pick and take Jayden Daniels, quarterback out of LSU. He's probably the most accurate deep passer in this class, especially throwing to the sideline, really concise throwing motion, and he's definitely the most athletic quarterback, but I think his ability to get through his progressions and throw over the middle of the field is going way underrated. kid. I've seen too many people say that he doesn't target the middle. That is just not true if you watch his tape. If you watch like the Auburn, Missouri, Ole Miss game, he's the king of throwing the backside dig. And when I saw how comfortable he was as a pocket passer, getting to his third read, delivering the ball accurately, that's what really ties him together as a prospect for me and makes him worth a top 5 pick in my eyes. And I think Atlanta has most of the pieces offensively to support him and make it worth giving up the draft capital to move up to 5. At 6, the Giants are going to take Malik Nabers, wide receiver out of LSU. He would be the best wide receiver in most draft classes, just no drag or delay changing directions or stopping his momentum. He's a demon after the catch. I do still have him behind Marvin Harrison Jr. because I don't trust him as much in contested catch situations, and I'm interested to see what he weighs in at. He's listed at 201 pounds, but he looks kind of light on tape. The Titans are picking at 7. I fully expect them to go wide receiver here, but this is a what I would do mock draft, so I'm going to go left tackle Olu Fashanu out of Penn State. He's a great example of how every conversation in the draft is relative. If you go back to my first mock draft, I was talking down on him because he's being viewed as offensive tackle 1, potential top 3 pick, and I don't think he projects as a great run blocker. I don't think he's as polished with his hands as you'd want him to be for a top 5 pick, but now I'm seeing him drop into the late teens and be like the 4th or 5th offensive tackle off the board. I think that's way too low for Olu Fashanu. There's no other tackle in this class that has anywhere near his upside as a pass protector. His recovery ability, his fluidity changing directions, I think is the best in this class. And I think the issues that you saw in the Ohio State game, which I assume is causing a lot of people to be lower on him, I think all of that's extremely fixable. He was getting walked back by power some in that game. I think a lot of it has to do with just hand placement, and there were a couple times that he was setting way too wide and not really keeping that comfortable distance before the pass rusher establishes contact. I don't know. If it's the run blocking that has people lower on him, I get that, I guess, but for the Titans, they just need something competent to protect Will Levis, so I'm going Olu Fashanu and running that card in. And then the Chargers trade down to 8. They're going to take Rome Odunze, wide receiver out of Washington. I think he's a ready-made high-end wide receiver 2. Supposedly, he's going to run in like the 4.4s. I didn't really see that on tape. I thought he kind of struggled to pull away from corners down the sideline, but he has some of the best hands in this class. He's a smart route runner. He's great in contested catch situations. Not really considering him above Malik Nabers like some other people are, but I think he's clearly the 3rd best receiver in this class. At 9, we've got the Bears. Ideally, Rome Odunze or Malik Nabers falls to 9, and then that's a no-brainer pick for them, but I'm going with the same pick that I went with in my last mock, which is Brock Bowers, tight end out of Georgia, and you can really just read the tight end as a slot receiver for the Bears purposes. He played most of his snaps at Georgia in the slot. He's basically just going to be a slot receiver that can also block. I think he's clearly the best offensive weapon on the board, and you can look at Detroit in the same division for a perfect example of how this can work out. They probably needed another receiver, but they took Sam Laporta, used him basically as a slot receiver, and it ended up working out and being a great pick. Cole Kmet's still going to be the wide tight end with his hand in the ground. He's going to be the one blocking defensive ends and stuff like that. Bowers is going to be lining up in the slot. Sometimes he'll be the second tight end right off of Cole Kmet. Slide him around the formation, get him on the move, have him blocking linebackers and DBs. He'll really excel in those situations. And I think receiver is a position in this class that you can upgrade later in the draft. The Jets, I feel like, are locked in to just take the best tackle on the board, and for me, that's Amarius Mims out of Georgia. He's played the least amount of snaps of any offensive tackle in this class, and the fact that he's being considered in the top 15, I think, speaks to how good his film is and how much natural talent he has. The Ohio State game in 2022 in the national championship game, I think, is one of the best individual performances from anyone in this class, and it really set the stage for what he can be as an offensive tackle. He needs to up his reaction time to inside counters. That was by far the biggest issue that I noticed on tape, and the combine will be big for him in terms of medical stuff because he has had a hard time staying healthy throughout his career. But just based off of the tape grade, I think he's one of the more underrated players in the first round of this class. A few years ago, I was in school studying engineering, and I just wasn't excited about doing that every day for the rest of my life. And I decided to start this YouTube channel and make the jump to covering sports full time, and it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. And today's video is sponsored by Southern New Hampshire University's online sports management program, which lets you turn your passion for sports into a degree. Their programs are led by faculty with real-world experience in sports, giving you the unique chance to learn from professionals and graduates, all all while building connections in the industry. So if you're wanting to get your foot in the door in the sports world, go to snhu.edu/A to Z Sports, also linked in the description, to see if you qualify for SNHU's sports management program. We've got the Vikings at 11. It seems like JJ McCarthy is probably going to be a top 10 pick, and there's a high likelihood that one of those teams in the low teens would trade up for him. I'm not quite there on JJ McCarthy. We'll get into the details when he comes off the board, but for me, I'm re-signing Kirk Cousins and trying to improve the rest of this roster. And I'm going to go with Dallas Turner here for Minnesota. He is my second ranked edge rusher by a very slim margin. I have Jared Verse ahead of him right now. I think day one, Verse is probably a more productive pass rusher, but Dallas Turner, I think, has a chance to be a top 5 edge, and I can't really say that for Verse. Turner has the length, explosiveness, power, doesn't really know what he's doing as far as pass rushing moves outside of the long arm and bull rush, but you can't teach his traits. He's only 21 years old. He has a really good track of development year to year, so we'll probably need a couple seasons to develop, but I think he definitely has the highest upside. We've got the Broncos at 12. For Denver, I'm trying to recoup some draft capital, so I'm going to have the Jags trade up. They're going to send 17, 49, and 117, and they're going to get back 12 and 76. And I've got them taking Talise Fuaga out of Oregon State, who's going to play guard for them. I don't view him as a player that has to move to tackle. I just think he's a much better guard prospect than he is a tackle prospect. His biggest issue at tackle is just pocket range and dealing with speed rushers. A lot of that's going to be kind of hidden on the inside. The Jags desperately need to upgrade their interior pass protection, but also their run blocking. Their interior O-line was one of the worst run blocking units that I watched last year. They just consistently got no push, falling off of blocks. Talise Fuaga is probably the best run blocker in this class. With the 13th pick, the Raiders are going to take J.C. Latham, offensive tackle out of Alabama, probably the strongest player in this class. He's got a deadly anchor, moves people off the line of scrimmage, really good with his hands, but I don't think he's an elite athlete. He's another player that could be a sneaky convert to guard, but I do think he still has the traits to play tackle. At 14, the Saints once again are going to take another swing at edge rusher and go with Jared Verse out of Florida State. Unlike some of the guys they've drafted in recent years, I think Verse is much more of a sure thing. He's one of the best power rushers in this class. He's actually pretty good with his hands. Doesn't have elite length or bend, which is why I have him going behind Dallas Turner, but I think he's an excellent prospect in his own right. At 15, we've got the Colts. I've gone corner for them every single mock draft that I've done. I'm not changing that now, but this cornerback class has me stumped, I've got to say. There are 3 corners that I could easily make an argument for as the best in this class. I'm going to go with Terrion Arnold here. I think he's got the best balance of speed, size, fluidity, ball skills. I think overall he probably has the best man coverage traits. Not a big fan of him in off coverage. I thought his click and close was kind of delayed, and whenever he had to turn his hips and accelerate down the field from off, that's when you would see him get stacked over the top. And then he's also just not a very disciplined corner in zone and match coverage at this point. I think that's definitely something that will improve and can be fixed, but you know, he's kind of solidified himself as the top corner consensus wise. I still think there are some drawbacks with him as a prospect, but his ability to just stick with people in man coverage, play aggressive press man, I think makes him worth a top 15 pick. For the Seahawks at 16, I'm going with Byron Murphy, defensive lineman out of Texas. I think he's going to be a crazy tester in a few weeks. He's got the elite first step. He's got the lateral quickness to cross a blocker's face. He's got power to win with his bull rush, but he's also got a refined set of pass rushing moves, really good with his hands. Kind of an up and down run defender. Very interested to see what his size measurements are. There's sometimes in the run game where he just gets bodied, so I think he is a 3 technique only, but with what he can give you as a pass rusher, I couldn't have him fall any further than this. And then the Broncos traded down. I love mock drafts because every single time I do a mock, it's like a hot potato situation for which fan base I want to piss off by giving them Bo Nix. So congratulations to the city of Denver. Nix to me is just B to B plus at everything. He's got a pretty good arm. He's a good athlete. He's relatively accurate. He's a decisive processor, doesn't turn the ball over. He can do some creative stuff out of structure. I think he's got to fix his footwork. He doesn't have great size, and he is an older prospect. So I understand the allure of JJ McCarthy in this situation. I just think Nix is a much more put together quarterback prospect at this point. Might not ever be a top 8 guy, but I think he has a really good chance to be a quality starter. But you know, I realize that I'm way higher on him than most people are. At 18, the Bengals are going to get their Jonah Williams replacement and take Tyler Guyton, right tackle out of Oklahoma. He's got rare movement skills for an offensive tackle. He's a converted tight end, just elite mirror skills and recovery ability, and one of the most densely packed offensive tackles that I've ever seen. The way that he moves and just the way that he looks on the field, it's hard to believe that he's 6'7", 328. He's not going to be a finished product day one. I think the hand placement and strike timing still need work, and with his athletic traits, I was pretty underwhelmed with his run blocking, although that seems to be a common theme for Oklahoma offensive tackles. They don't have a rushing scheme that's very conducive to highlight blocks or like really translatable to the NFL. One of my least favorite schemes to evaluate, I would say. The Rams are picking at 19. I'm going to have the Texans trade up. They're going to send 23 and a future third-round pick and take Johnny Newton, defensive tackle out of Illinois. This is another player, now that we're starting to see some mock drafts from people in the know, that the NFL seems to be a lot lower on than I am. I get that he doesn't have long arms and he isn't the biggest defensive tackle, but like Kalijah Kancey went in the top 20 and that pick worked out for the Bucks. And I think Johnny Newton's a better prospect than Kancey was. He's a pass rushing technician, so quick with his hands. He has pretty much every move at his disposal. He's been consistently productive for 2 years, and he's actually a good run defender. If you watch his tape, there's not very many losses, and he's constantly making plays in the backfield. For me, 19 is about as late as I'm willing to go with Johnny Newton. Tough pick here for the Steelers. This is where I'm starting to consider J.J. McCarthy. I also thought about Jackson Powers Johnson at center, but I think the drop off at corner in this class is pretty steep once you get outside of the top 35 to 40 picks. So I decided to go with Nate Wiggins, cornerback out of Clemson. I initially had him as my cornerback 1. I've moved him down slightly to cornerback 2, although it's a complete jumbled mess at the top of this cornerback class. The more I think about it though, I do kind of worry about him being 185 pounds. If he was like 195 or 200, he would be pushing a top 10 player for me. The movement skills, the fluidity in man coverage, how comfortable he is in press. He's, I would say, elite at playing the ball in the air. He has really good hand-eye coordination to rake the ball out. From a coverage perspective, his tape this past year was about as good as it gets, but he's undersized. He's competitive playing off of blocks, but sometimes he just gets outmatched and can't really anchor against like a bigger tight end that's pushing him to the sideline. So those concerns are valid. I just don't agree with him being too far outside of the top 20. The Dolphins are at 21. They need help at pretty much every offensive line spot. I'm going to go with Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon. He played center for Oregon last year. He's got experience at guard, and he played some guard at the Senior Bowl, looked just as good there. I forget where, but I heard that he might have a medical issue that could cause him to fall in the draft. That's not affecting his stock for me right now, but if he does fall on draft day, I would assume that's going to be why. But he could play any of the 3 interior spots. He's a brick wall against power, mauling run blocker, but he's got really impressive lateral fluidity and recovery ability for a player of his size. He isn't the most technically polished offensive line prospect, but I think he's a day one starter, very young player with plenty of room to grow. And then my favorite fit in this class is the Eagles at 22, taking cornerback Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo. Quinyon Mitchell in a Fangio defense is just a dream scheme fit. He showed at the Senior Bowl that he can play press coverage, and Fangio still runs plenty of man, so he'll be in those situations. But letting him play off match coverage and just break on underneath routes from depth, I think that's where he's going to be at his best. He's had incredible production over the last 2 seasons. He's got elite recovery speed, elite explosiveness, pretty good size. Needs to kind of refine his technique at the line of scrimmage. He's still a little bit too jumpy for me in press, but I think he's a lock first rounder. Could definitely see him being the second cornerback off the board. And then the Rams are going to take Cooper DeJean at 23, defensive back out of Iowa. I think he's best as a slot, although he could play outside in a quarters heavy scheme like the Rams have. I don't really worry about his speed. He just doesn't look that comfortable turning around and playing the ball. So having him in those press man situations, I just don't feel like he's going to have much success defending a go route down the sideline. But breaking on routes from off coverage, defending the run, he's got a lot of high-end athletic traits. And for a team that just needs talent in their defensive backfield, I think Cooper DeJean is a great fit. The Cowboys are picking at 24. They are an especially tough team to draft for. There's a lot of unknowns with their roster situation. What's their receiver room going to look look like. I assume Tyron Smith is going to be back at left tackle, but we don't know that for sure. But I saw some signs of age regression in Stephon Gilmore down the stretch this past season, so I'm going to continue the run on corners and take Ennis Rakestraw out of Missouri. He's got long arms, really good short area quickness, extremely composed in press coverage at the line of scrimmage, and he's one of the most aggressive and productive corners in this class defending the run. I thought his deep speed looked perfectly fine on tape, but I have heard multiple people that I trust that question his speed, so we'll see what that looks like at the combine. And he finished the season injured, so we'll have to wait and see on that. But I think in terms of man coverage traits, he's the best cornerback available by a healthy margin. And with Trayvon Diggs coming back, Deron Bland having a breakout season, he'll be moving back to the slot, and then you've got Ennis Rakestraw on the outside. I think that's a very promising cornerback trio for the Cowboys. He's also very smart in terms of picking up switch releases and like diagnosing stuff from match coverage, which has kind of been their Achilles heel, so that'll be a welcome addition. We got the Packers picking at 25. They're probably the most fun team to draft for because they have a lot of draft capital. They have a couple needs in the secondary, but outside of that, really no glaring needs. And so they can truly just take a best player available approach and just, make sure that they grab a safety and a slot corner along the way. But I'm actually going to have them trade down with the Giants. New York's going to send 38 and 70. They're going to come up and take JJ McCarthy, quarterback out of Michigan. Again, for anyone that's going to comment, no way JJ McCarthy's still there at 25. I completely understand that. This is a what I would do mock draft. Still leave that comment though, because it's good for the algorithm. But with McCarthy, there have been a ton of reports in recent weeks that the NFL views him as a top 10 player and he's going to go a lot higher than people expect. I believe that because I have no reason not to, but I'm not really on board with that from an evaluation standpoint. He's a young player. He was in a very low volume passing offense at Michigan, but if you watch his tape, it was actually a high volume of NFL concepts. So comparing him to some of the other quarterbacks in this class, even though he might be throwing the ball less, I actually think we got more looks at his processing and his ability to read out concepts over the middle of the field. Still will make some bad decisions, but I think there should be a clear distinction between processing and decision making. He can get from 1 to 2 to check down. He isn't like indecisive, getting rid of the ball into tight windows. He throws with good anticipation, gets to the backside of his progressions. I definitely see what people like in JJ McCarthy, and even though I have him 28th on my board, if he went 11th or 10th or something like that, I wouldn't have a major problem with it, but he isn't very accurate. He's got some bad misses where he's sailing it over his receiver's head, and so many plays where he's hitting his receiver out of stride, limiting yak opportunities because they have to slow down and work back to the football. And with McCarthy, I think youth and inexperience is kind of being conflated with upside because I don't think he has an elite arm. He can generate a ton of velocity and just rip a laser down the seam. He puts as much heat on his passes as anyone, but he really struggles to throw with touch. If he's got to elevate it over and underneath defender, it's just a line drive that they're going to intercept. And when he has to throw with touch down the sideline, you see a lot of underthrown go routes because when he's putting that extra elevation on it, he sacrifices some of his distance. But with all that being said, I think he has more upside than Daniel Jones. He's definitely an upgrade for the Giants at quarterback, and I think he could project as somewhere in that Alex Smith to Dak Prescott range of quarterbacks. And you pair him with Malik Neighbors and some actually pretty solid weapons that the Giants have built up, I think you've got the foundations for a functional offense. At 26, I've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers taking Laiatu Latu, edge rusher out of UCLA. He's the most skilled pass rusher in this class. He plays like someone that should already be in the NFL, but athletically, I think he's just a guy. He's got good explosiveness, but kind of average bend and flexibility and pretty short arms for an edge rusher. And against better competition, I thought his level of play definitely dropped off, but I could definitely see him being a Trey Hendrickson caliber of pass rusher. You can't be that good with your hands and not be productive at all. And Tampa Bay is going to get a nice upgrade to their pass rush here. The Cardinals are picking at 27. We upgraded left tackle with our first pick. Now we're going to go with A.D. Mitchell, wide receiver out of Texas. Every time I see a mock draft that has this guy falling out of the first round, I lose a year off of my life. If you just go to ESPN and sort by receiving yards, I could see being low on him, but he's 21 years old. He's 6'4". He's a fluid route runner, can change directions instantly. He catches everything, only had one drop last year. He's really good at adjusting to the ball down the field, and he just torches press coverage. He's not that productive after the catch, but outside of that, I don't have too many major concerns with AD Mitchell. Unless he runs like a 4.7, he's going to end up as a top 20 player for me. With the 28th pick, the Bills are going to go Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver out of LSU. He is the prototypical deep threat, just the dream combination of size, speed, ability to beat press coverage, and then ball tracking ability down the field. If you just go down the line of every skill set that you want for a deep threat, Brian Thomas Jr. checks every single box. Gabe Davis has been a disappointment, probably not going to be re-signed. Stephon Diggs seems to be falling off. The Bills need an upgraded outside receiver, and Brian Thomas Jr. is the last receiver left that I have a first-round grade on. We got the Lions at 29. Cornerback isn't their only need, but it's definitely their most glaring need. So I'm going to take Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama. At 21 years old, he plays like a seasoned veteran. Press coverage, he's just so composed and fluid with his footwork. He looks like he's been practicing his press coverage shuffle steps since he was 5 years old. He had a lot more ball production in 2022. He actually led college football in pass breakups, only 4 pass breakups this year, but his targets were cut in half. That's what opened up the opportunity for Terrion Arnold to play his way in the first round because he was the one getting all the targets. I just think he's kind of a limited athlete. He looked like pretty much the same player in 2023 as he did the year before, and I'm not sure that he has this elite upside to be a top 10 or top 5 cornerback, but I also think he has a really high floor, which is a rare thing to say for a cornerback prospect, and he'll definitely be an upgrade to what the Lions had outside this year. The Baltimore Ravens are back with a need at receiver, unfortunately, so I'm going to take Keon Coleman out of Florida State. Very early in the process, I was a lot lower on Keon Coleman than the consensus. He was top 10 on pretty much everyone's board, which was way too high, but he's balanced out to, I think, a good spot, 25th on the consensus board. Again, it goes back to what I was saying with Olu Fashanu, where every conversation in the draft is relative. Back when Keon Coleman was going 8th in every mock draft, I definitely felt the need to explain why I was lower on him, but there's still plenty to like with him as a prospect. He's got the ball skills, he's got reliable hands. I don't think he had a single drop until the last game against Louisville. I believe he had 2 drops in that game. I think I've maybe been underrating his speed a little bit. I was going back and rewatching the tape for some of the guys that I watched early, and I was definitely forgetting or not remembering a couple plays where he was outrunning the entire defense. I've seen some people trying to sell me on him being a good route runner. I'm still not there with him. I think the fluidity and explosiveness in and out of breaks is still lacking, but late first, early second, I think that's a perfect spot for Keon Coleman, and still a young player with plenty of room for development. We've got the 49ers picking at 31. My goal for the Niners this draft is to upgrade the offensive line as much as I possibly can. If you go back to my division previews, one of my worst takes from the offseason was having the Seahawks winning the NFC West, and the reason I was lower on the 49ers is because outside of Trent Williams, and I like the upside of Spencer Burford, outside of those two, I wasn't very high on this offensive line, and the talent on the rest of the roster was able to overcome that. Brock Purdy definitely exceeded my expectations, but in the Super Bowl, that offensive line weakness came to fruition and kind of cost them the game. So I'm going to start the rebuilding with Graham Barton, who played left tackle for Duke, but probably projects as a guard or even a center in the NFL. He's a mauler in the run game. He has all the movement skills that you need for San Francisco's offense. Very composed and technically sound in pass protection, but his lack of length gets him in trouble, especially dealing with power rushes. If you're going to vertical set in the NFL, you've got to be able to eat a bull rush. If they go speed to power, you have to be able to engage quickly, drop your anchor. He just doesn't have the length to keep his frame clean, and especially on the edge, that results in some pretty dominant losses to power. But I actually think he has good play strength and could be a lot more solid against power rushes if he moves inside, which is a rare thing to say for an offensive lineman. At 32, I'm going to have the Chiefs take Troy Franklin, wide receiver out of Oregon. Now, this is about 10 spots higher than I have him on my board, but he's one of 2 receivers left that I'm comfortable taking in this range, and the other guy who's going to go off the board at 33 I think is kind of redundant with what they already have. Troy Franklin could be that deep threat of the future. He's got blazing speed. He's really fluid beating press coverage at the line of scrimmage. He's pretty thin, and he does have drop issues, so I think the Marquez Valdes-Scantling comps are valid, unfortunately, but I still think there's a ton of natural talent to develop with Troy Franklin. And then I've got the Panthers taking taking wide receiver Ladd McConkey out of Georgia. I think he's the best route runner in this class. He's just immediate in and out of his breaks. He can sit down and stop his momentum in 1 or 2 steps. He projects probably as a slot, but he can beat press coverage. He's got good speed to win over the top. I do worry about him not having the biggest catch radius, and as a smaller receiver, he's been banged up a lot throughout his career. If you could guarantee me that he was going to play at least 15 games every season, he would be a lock first rounder for me. But so much to like with Ladd McConkey. He's exactly what the Panthers need to be looking for, as someone that can get open quickly in the short to intermediate game for Bryce Young. For the Commanders at 33, I'm going to take Jordan Morgan, offensive lineman out of Arizona. He played left tackle in college, but he does have under 33-inch arms, which is the cutoff for a lot of teams. I think I've said this in every mock draft, but once we get into the 30s, I'm going to have to start reaching for some of these teams that need offensive tackles. I think length does matter for whether someone's a tackle or a guard. I don't think it's as hard of a cutoff as some people do. In my opinion, Jordan Morgan's bigger issue is power, which isn't something that usually gets easier moving to guard. But he's an excellent run blocker, very skilled with his hands in pass pro. He had some of the best reps of anyone in this class against Laiatu Latu. Really showed off his ability to use bait technique to draw out his move and then establish late contact. I think he could be the Charles Leno replacement at left tackle. You could move him over to the right side to replace Andrew Wiley, or he could slide in at left guard. So really looking at him for 3 positions on the offensive line. Just got to figure out where he works best. We got New England at 35. First pick, we took Marvin Harrison Jr. Now we're going to upgrade the offensive line and take left tackle Karan Amagaji out of Yale. He has a massive frame, 99th percentile arm length, elite movement skills, very explosive off the line of scrimmage, and I wouldn't call him a project. It's more that he's kind of an unknown based on the level of competition that he faced. His tape in the Ivy League was dominant, but he never faced anything close to NFL level competition. He was never really tested to the point where you could see what his weaknesses might be. That's why I wish he would have played at the Senior Bowl, but he was injured. Watching him on tape though, I was very pleasantly surprised by his hand usage, just routine inside hand placement. He's got the movement skills to get a lot of depth in his set, but there were sometimes he would underset and give kind of a short corner to speed rushes. To me, that's not an athletic limitation, just something he needs to clean up as far as technique. But as I continue to kind of refine my grades and stack up this offensive tackle class, I find myself a lot higher on Karan Amagaji than some of these other guys. The Cardinals have pick 36. I'm going to have them trade down with Philadelphia. The Eagles are going to send 46 and 98, and they're going to come up and take Tyler Nubin, safety out of Minnesota. We added Quinyon Mitchell at 22, and we're going to make another secondary upgrade with Tyler Nubin. He had an extremely productive career at Minnesota, 13 interceptions, very instinctive, jumping those in-breaking routes, especially from the backside as like a robber or poach safety. He does a great job with eye balance of identifying the route distribution, but keeping eyes on the quarterback and understanding when he's going to release the ball so he can time up his break. He's got really good size and length. He's a physical run defender, secure wrap-up tackler. I like his straight line explosiveness and his ability to trigger out of his back pedal, crash on like a flat route. I think his main limitation is having to change directions and change speeds. If he takes a false step and kind of bites forward and then he has to recover depth, that's where you'll see him get beat. But I've had him as a top 40 player since I watched him. Most of the consensus rankings, like especially the new ones that I'm adding, have him somewhere in the 50s to 60s, which I kind of disagree with. And I think he's clearly the best safety in this class. The Chargers really need a number 1 cornerback, and there's about to be a steep drop off at that position. So I'm going to take Kamari Lassiter, cornerback out of Georgia. Another thing I say in every mock draft is I just cannot believe that this dude is 180 pounds. I need to see him weigh in at that at the combine to believe it. He doesn't look skinny at all, and he doesn't play like an undersized corner. He's really disruptive in press coverage, plays with a ton of physicality. He needs to work on releasing contact once they get past the 5-yard window, and I'm interested to see what he runs in the 40. Sometimes he's recovering downfield and he'll be grabbing at the jersey. I don't know if that's because of a lack of recovery speed or if it's just the habit that he has of grabbing, but I think he's a physical, competitive corner with some good man coverage traits. The Packers are finally making a pick here, and I'm going to have them take Troy Fontenot, offensive lineman out of Washington. He's one of the 2 or 3 players that I'm lowest on relative to consensus. Pretty much every mock draft is going to have him going somewhere in the 20s or late teens. He played left tackle at Washington. I think he's definitely going to move inside when he gets to the NFL. He actually has really long arms, almost 35 inches, but he really struggles just mirroring all that space on the outside. He'll get beat around the corner occasionally, but you can tell that he's really overcompensating for that lack of pocket range. He leans his weight way too far upfield, and he's just so vulnerable to inside counters. And then he doesn't have a great anchor. He's really good with his hands at using the snatch trap technique to neutralize power rushers, and he kind of makes up for some of that lack of play strength. But I just think the edge rushers that he's going to have to block in the NFL is too much for him to handle. And then outside of when he's pulling, I don't think he's a very good run blocker at all. So I like his footwork and I like his hand usage. I think he projects as a high quality pass blocking interior offensive lineman. He could play guard or center. I don't think that's worth a first round pick, but in the 2nd or 3rd round, I think that's appropriate value for Troy Fontenot. The Titans have the 39th pick. I'm going to have them trade down with the Lions. Detroit's going to send 61 and 75, and they're going to trade up and take Darius Robinson, edge rusher out of Missouri. He's a converted defensive tackle. This past season was his first year playing on the edge, and he had by far the most productive season of his career. He's got elite size and length for an edge rusher. He does a great job getting low, getting into his power rush. For such a big player, whenever he tries to bull rush or long arm an offensive lineman, he's consistently playing with lower pad level. He's not exactly a bend around the edge type of guy, but I was impressed with his overall moveset. He's still somewhat of a developmental player, still working on his timing and accuracy with his hands, but he has a really effective swim move. He's consistently latching onto the outside shoulder with his inside hand and then ripping through, very fluid motion. He had some wins countering inside with a club move, and then you'll see him use the double swipe or side scissors. And he also had a few nice reps with the forklift technique where you're grabbing the blocker's wrists and kind of raising their hands up in the air. The Lions need some sort of edge presence opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. I think Darius Robinson can be a somewhat productive pass rusher immediately with a ton of room for development. Like, his upside as a pass rusher is through the roof. And then he also projects as a better run defender than Aiden Hutchinson, who's kind of average in that phase. And the Lions have a need at defensive tackle opposite of Aleem McNeil, so if they wanted to, they could have Darius Robinson add some weight and play 3-tech for them. But my suggestion would be to keep him on the edge. That's where he looks most comfortable. Continuing what's going to be a mini run on edge rushers, I've got the Falcons at 40 taking Chris Braswell out of Alabama. He's an explosive power rusher. I've heard some people talk about him like that's all he can do. He has one of the best cross chops of anyone in this class. Look up his sack towards the end of the game against Auburn if you want to see just a masterclass on defeating the outside hand, bending around the corner. He just doesn't have great size and doesn't have a frame that really projects towards being a high-level power rusher in the NFL, and he looked kind of above average at the Senior Bowl. Definitely had some wins, but I was expecting more from Chris Braswell. At 41, the Commanders unfortunately still need a cornerback. Even though they took Emmanuel Forbes in the 1st round last year, I was not a fan of that pick, and he didn't do anything in his rookie year to change my opinion on that. Benjamin St-Juste doesn't seem to be the answer, and Kendall Fuller's a free agent, so they definitely need a cornerback. And I'm going to take TJ Tampa out of Iowa State because I think there's a huge drop off after TJ Tampa. As a spoiler, I don't have another cornerback going off the board for 30 picks. Tampa's a really good zone corner, fitting last name because he's so effective playing the flats in cover 2. He has ideal size and speed, good ball skills, comfortable playing the ball in the air, and he's a plus run defender. My one hang up with TJ Tampa is I think there's some stiffness in man coverage. I'm not sure he really has the ability to turn and man guys up, but he's the last 2nd round grade I have at cornerback. At 42, the Packers are going to take Chop Robinson, edge rusher out of Penn State. Preston Smith seems to be slowing down. Lucas Van Ness has plenty of upside, but he's still unproven. And Rashawn Gary was really disappointing down the stretch last year. I still believe in Gary to bounce back from that, but I think edge is a position that's worth addressing for the Packers. Chop Robinson has so much potential as a designated pass rusher. His explosiveness and just speed around the edge is off the charts, but very unrefined hand usage, doesn't really have a moveset to speak of. He just kind of tries to outrun offensive tackles around the corner. He looks like he has pretty long arms though, and he does a good job using his hands in the run game, so I think that is something that could be developed. I'm gonna have the Colts do a minor trade up here with the Vikings. I've got the Colts giving 47 and 115 for 43 and 169. They're gonna trade up and take Xavier Legette, wide receiver out of South Carolina. He's got good size, measured in at 6'1". He was listed at 6'3" on South Carolina's website, but 223 pounds. He's got breakaway speed. I think he's an underrated route runner. He can explode violently out of his breaks and create separation. And then he had some focus drops, but flashes of dominance in contested catch situations and ball tracking ability deep down the field. He needs to get better at beating press coverage, and I worry about late breakouts with receivers, but I think Xavier Legette is the clear best receiver on the board, and there is kind of a drop off on my board after him. At 44, the Saints are going to take left tackle Patrick Paul out of Houston. New Orleans is in bad shape with their offensive line. Trevor Penning looks like a complete bust. Ryan Ramczyk might be retiring, and Patrick Paul has all the natural talent to be a shutdown left tackle. He still just has unrefined hand usage. He's habitually late and wide with his punch, lets pass rushers get into his frame, and so I thought early in the year he could potentially be a first-round pick based on traits, but he still has some room to grow. With the 45th pick, the Bears are going to take Zach Frazier, center out of West Virginia. He's an excellent run blocker, really effective on outside zone. He has the ideal build for a center, short, stout, low to the ground, doesn't have elite length, but he has a really solid anchor in pass pro. The biggest knock on Zach Frazier is that he had a season-ending injury, but he was doing some walkthrough drills at the Senior Bowl, so there's a potential chance that he could be ready for training camp. At 46, it's time for the Cardinals to finally start addressing the defensive side of the ball. We're going to start with nose tackle T'Vondre Sweat out of Texas. This dude is massive. He's listed at 346 pounds at Texas. He was the only player that declined to weigh in at the Senior Bowl. That tells me that he was probably heavier than he wanted NFL teams to know, and he's basically immovable in run defense. He'll be an immediate upgrade in that phase. At Texas, he was a really effective pass rusher, mostly a finesse rusher in college. He's really good with his hands. He has that slap down technique against two-hand punches, and then at the Senior Bowl, we saw flashes of his ability to win with power, which he never really used in college. I still kind of question his upside as a pass rusher because he isn't that explosive. You're not going to be that explosive at 350 or whatever he weighs. So there's a lot of times that he'll win with his hands, but then he doesn't have the closing burst to finish and get to the quarterback. And I don't know if he's a guy that you want to build your pass rush around, but I think he can be a nose tackle that also contributes to the pass rush. With the 47th pick, the Vikings are going to take Michael Hall Jr., defensive tackle out of Ohio State. He's one of the 2 or 3 quickest and most explosive defensive tackles in this class. I comped him to Draymond Jones. He kind of has that build of the green dude in Monsters Inc.
Watching you, Wazowski.
He's really short with long arms, so he has good leverage when he uses power, but then he's so quick with his hands. He was kind of a rotational player at Ohio State, so he didn't get that much production, but when you look at the efficiency metrics like pass rush win rate, he ranked really highly in those. He is a 3 technique only though. If you try to have him anchor against double teams, he's just not going to hold up. With the 48th pick, I've got the Giants taking Christian Haynes, guard out of Connecticut. I think UConn has a rule where they can only have one good football player on their team at a time. They had Travis Jones a few years ago. Christian Haynes was one of the best guards in college football last year. He's a great outside zone blocker, just routine securing reach blocks, climbing to the second level. On his college tape, I was really impressed with his improvement from 2022 to 2023 in pass pro. I think he does a great job with his hand placement, refitting his hands throughout the rep. He's got the ankle flexion to sit down and drop his anchor, but the level of competition he was facing was pretty weak. He held up against the better competition. The NC State game was one of his best games, and then he looked pretty solid against Tennessee as well, but he had those level of competition concerns, and then he gets to the Senior Bowl and was one of the best offensive linemen there. For me, that performance in Mobile solidified him as a top 50 player on my board. At 49, Green Bay is going to take Cameron Kitchens, safety out of Miami. Heading into the year, he had a chance to maybe be a first-round pick, but his tape this year was just way too up and down. He's He's a ball hawking safety, but that aggressive playmaking instinct kind of gets him in trouble at times. This year, he was just jumping on routes that weren't there, taking poor angles as a tackler. He still had the high end plays, but he would balance it out by, making a great interception and then giving up a 70-yard touchdown. At 50, the Bengals need a defensive tackle. DJ Reader is probably going to miss some time next year. I'm going to take Chris Jenkins out of Michigan. I'm kind of trusting Bruce Feldman's freaks list with this one. He has really good size. He's supposedly going to be an elite tester at the combine, and he was a good player for Michigan this year, but not necessarily that impactful. Defensive tackle can be a low-key, very difficult position to evaluate because a lot of these college schemes aren't having them rush the passer very often. He's taking read steps at the beginning of every play, so he's not going to have this elite get off and explosive first step, but he did show enough flashes as a pass rusher. That combined with what I expect him to test like at the combine, I'm comfortable taking him in the top 50, and he was a really good run defender at Michigan. All right, now that we're into the 50s, I am going to try to speed these picks up a little bit to make the video length somewhat reasonable. At 51, I've got the Rams taking Marshawn Kneeland out of Western Michigan. He has the prototypical frame for a defensive end, really good power rusher, not much of a speed rusher. Thought he had a pretty impressive showing at the Senior Bowl as well. At 52, the Steelers are going to take Michael Penix Jr. out of Washington. I think he has a really good arm. He shows flashes of high-end accuracy, flashes of really good processing and decision making, but throw to throw, he's just not an accurate quarterback. I question his ability to create out of structure. There are a concerning amount of bad decisions on tape. That combined with being an older prospect with injury issues, that has him more in the 50s on my board. Miami at 53, I'm going to take another swing at the offensive line and go with Kingsley Suamataia, left tackle out of BYU. He has an incredible combination of size and athleticism. Third on Bruce Feldman's freaks list, probably going to put on a show at the combine. In pass pro, he needs to improve its stunt recognition and blocking inside counters, but he has a really solid anchor and flashes some impressive hand usage. Philly's up at 54. We've addressed two of the three major defensive needs, safety and corner. Now we're going to take a linebacker, Edgerrin Cooper out of Texas A&M. I have him at 41 on my board as my top ranked linebacker, so this is definitely a fall for him. I just couldn't find a great fit. Cooper has sideline to sideline range. He's got really long arms, kind of undersized, only 227 pounds, but I think he has the frame to add more mass. He can excel in pretty much any coverage role you need him to. He was a really productive pass rusher, 10 sacks last year. He does a good job shedding blocks, relatively quick fit recognition in the run game. Biggest issues with him are, again, the slender frame like I mentioned, and he's kind of stiff breaking down an open space. He has 32 career missed tackles. At 55, the Browns are going to take Xavier Worthy, joystick movement skills, instant change of direction, stop-start ability. He has the speed of a deep threat, but I think he can actually be a high-level separator. He's not just like a one-route receiver, but he's pretty much incapable of making contested catches. His catch radius is so small. If you just stick an arm out, you're pretty much shielding him from the ball. The Cowboys at 56 need a linebacker. I'm going to take my linebacker 2, which is Peyton Wilson out of NC State. You might get some bad flashbacks of taking a linebacker with injury concerns, but I do think he's clearly the second best linebacker in this class. I heard someone describe him as a gnat, just constantly swarming around the football. That's the perfect description for Peyton Wilson. Led Power 5 defenders last year in defensive stops. He's a good cover linebacker, and for the Cowboys, I think it's finally time to let the defensive backs play defensive back and let the linebackers play linebacker. I've got the Broncos taking Austin Booker, edge rusher out of Kansas. He's a young player, surprising early entry into the draft. He has, in my opinion, the traits of a first-round pick, and he flashed some high-level pass rushing moves, block deconstruction, but he's 240 pounds, so he is a bit of a developmental project. He has to add weight, but I think if he can get up to 255, 260, you've got a potential number one pass rusher. With the 58th pick, the Bucs are going to take another Kansas player, Dominic Pooney. He played left tackle for Kansas. At the Senior Bowl, he was working at all three offensive line spots. In the one-on-one, 1-on-1s, he would move from tackle to guard to center. I think he lost the first rep of the first practice, but then after that, he won every single rep. I liked his tape at Kansas. It was kind of difficult to evaluate because they run the triple option, but he was one of the better offensive linemen in Mobile, and he has some nice positional versatility. At 59, I'm going to have the Texans take Jalen Polk, wide receiver out of Washington. Really nuanced route runner, does a great job attacking the ball in the air, catching with full extension, just doesn't have elite size or athletic traits. At 60, I've got the Bills taking Javon Bullard, safety out of Georgia. I loved his tape, really impressed with his route recognition, his ability to explode out of his back pedal and break on the ball. He is pretty undersized though, and didn't have a great showing at the Senior Bowl. None of the safeties really did, but that performance in Mobile did move him out of the top 50 for me. With the 61st pick, the Titans are going to take Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver out of Florida. I think he can play slot or Z. He's a very precise route runner, quick in and out of his breaks, really effective against zone coverage, does a great job of being quarterback friendly, keeping himself open. He has really good hands. The one-handed catch against Charlotte early in the season was probably the catch of the year, but probably doesn't project as much of a deep threat. The Ravens need to replace Ronnie Stanley. I'm going to take Christian Jones out of Texas. He's the most experienced offensive tackle in this class, leads the class in games started and snaps played. He's got really good length, straight line explosiveness. He does a good job playing with independent hands. He has a reliable anchor. He's a people mover in the run game. His biggest problem is short area quickness, so if he has to cut off a run blitz or block an inside counter, that's where you'll see the majority of his losses. At 63, the 49ers are going to take another swing at the offensive line with Roger Rosengarten, right tackle out of Washington. He's going to be the Colton McKivitz replacement. I thought he was probably the best offensive tackle at the Senior Bowl. 11 one-on-ones, won every single rep. He has rare pocket range and recovery ability. He moves around the pocket like a tight end, but he doesn't have great length, and he's kind of undisciplined with his set depth. He's over-reliant on his recovery ability, so he'll leave way too wide of a B gap, and at the college level, he can usually get away with that, but he needs to clean that up in the NFL. Final pick of the second round, I've got the Chiefs going with Leonard Taylor, defensive tackle out of Miami. This goes back to what I was saying about defensive tackle being a very difficult position to evaluate. Leonard Taylor is a former 5-star recruit. I think he has first-round traits in terms of length, frame, explosiveness, but Miami had him playing nose tackle, and that's just not his game. Half of his reps, he's like anchoring against a double team. There were very few examples where he could just fire off the line of scrimmage and try to win one-on-one as a pass rusher. When he did get those opportunities, he was very effective, but like I watched all of Leonard Taylor's tape probably a month and a half ago, and I still find myself raising and lowering his grade just based on how I'm feeling that day, because he's a player that I just can't really get a read on. But I still think it's worth a shot for the Chiefs to maybe get a long-term developmental replacement for Chris Jones. First pick of the third round, we got the Panthers. Pretty much everything that I'm doing as the GM of the Panthers here is focused on supporting Bryce Young. You could argue with going offensive line. I actually don't think what they have on the roster is that bad. Their biggest issue last year was injuries. So I'm leaning towards doubling up on receiver if I'm Carolina, and I'm going to take Jermaine Burton, wide receiver out of Alabama. Based on his tape, I have a higher grade on him than this. My comp for him is actually Adam Thielen. I think he's an advanced route runner. He's got the horizontal quickness to separate consistently. Didn't have a single drop last year. He's got really good play strength. He can win in contested catch situations. New England's up at 67. I'm going to have the Seahawks send 78 and 116 and come trade up for Cooper Beebe, guard out of Kansas State. He's a mauling run blocker, really good play strength in every phase, technically sound in pass pro, but he has very short arms, even for a guard. At 68, the Cardinals are going to continue to upgrade their defense and take Braylon Trice, edge rusher out of Washington. He led college football in pressures last year, very good power rusher. I think he can come in and immediately be a productive pocket pusher, but he doesn't have elite athletic traits, really struggles to bend around the edge, and he's in the 20s or 30s on a lot of boards. I have him more as a third rounder. He's also disappointing against the run. At 69, I've got the Chargers taking defensive lineman Mekhi Wingo out of LSU. I think he's a really underrated player. His season was cut short due to injury, but he's a really good run defender, flashes of just an overwhelming bull rush. He had a couple reps against Arkansas and Mississippi State if you want to go find those, where he just knocked the tackle on his back on initial contact. With the 70th pick, I've got the Packers taking Renardo Green, cornerback out of Florida State. He was pretty clearly the best corner at the Shrine Bowl. Should have gotten a Senior Bowl invite. His tape was really good. He had 13 pass breakups last year. He had some really good reps against Malik Neighbors, and he's just a get-in-your-face press corner, which it seems like Jeff Hafley is actually going to let his corners do. And then more of an off corner, I've got the Cardinals at 71 taking Dwight McGlothern out of Arkansas. He breaks quickly from off coverage. He's got good instincts in zone, 4 forced fumbles for his career, a lot of ball production, 8 picks, 24 pass breakups. He had an interception on Jaden Daniels, and he's kind of skinny, but overall he has good size. I don't know why he's not getting more recognition. At 72, the Falcons are going to take Michigan wide receiver Roman Wilson. He was the star of the Senior Bowl. According to Bruce Feldman, he's going to run a 4.33 in the 40-yard dash, 6.20 in the 3-cone would be the fastest 3-cone time that I have in my database. His tape at Michigan wasn't nearly as impressive as he looked in the Senior Bowl. I still think he's a pretty unpolished route runner, and for an undersized player that doesn't give you much after the catch and still I think needs a lot of development as far as route tempo and cutting off his breaks cleanly, I feel like the first round hype for him is way too much. He's more of a 3rd round player for me, so I am a little bit lower on him, but I can definitely see talking yourself into Roman Wilson based on the movement skills and how much better he looked in the most recent time that we saw him in Mobile. The Bears are going to trade down from 73 with the Cardinals. Arizona's giving 90 and 104, and they're going to take linebacker Junior Colson from Michigan. Very smart player with an NFL-ready skill set, good size, but lacking in high-end athletic traits. At 74, I've got the Jets taking Washington wide receiver Jalen McMillan. He's kind of the forgotten receiver out of the trio at Washington, but I think he's a pretty underrated player, is more of a big slot, missed some time with an injury, but he should go in the first 3 rounds. With the 75th pick, I've got the Titans taking Rutgers cornerback Max Melton. He's an outside corner with good length, really impressive route recognition. He's another player, though, that I want to see what he runs in the 40. I thought his recovery speed was inconsistent on tape. The Jags have the 76th pick. I'm becoming more and more open to them letting Calvin Ridley walk and taking the comp pick. I think regardless, they still need to add another receiver, but I'm going to take Javon Baker out of UCF, who can be the Calvin Ridley replacement and play X for them. He's a deep threat with good size, really effective changing directions. He's got some wiggle and change of direction in and out of his breaks. And outside of Roman Wilson, I wasn't blown away by any of the receivers at the Senior Bowl, but Javon Baker definitely had some nice reps. At 77, the Raiders are going to take Jarvis Brownlee Jr., aggressive, feisty press corner. At the Senior Bowl, he showed off his elite route recognition, definitely the biggest riser on my board from Mobile. At 78, I'm going to have the Patriots reach and take wide receiver Tez Walker out of UNC. This is about 15 to 20 spots higher than I'd be comfortable taking him, but I think there's a pretty severe drop-off after Tez Walker here, and I'm trying to create as favorable of a situation for whatever quarterback they have next offseason. I've kind of beat it to death, but he's a deep threat with drop issues that can't really sink his hips and struggles to beat press coverage, and at the Senior Bowl, he just couldn't catch anything. I'm going to have the Colts take LSU defensive lineman Mason Smith at pick 79. When they had some injuries last year, you really saw the lack of depth on their defensive line. As a pass rusher, he has a really effective swim move. He's so tall, that's basically the most natural move for him to get into. He needs to add something on top of just spamming that every rep, and he flashes the ability to be a dominant block shedder, but his top-heavy build gives him some natural difficulties defending the run. I've got the Seahawks taking Washington State safety Jaden Hicks at pick 80. Really impressive ball skills. He's got ideal size to play in the box. I wish he was a better tackler. That's really my biggest problem with him, and for the Seahawks specifically, who struggled so much with tackling last year, it's not the best fit, but as a true safety, he's by far the highest graded player that I have left. The Jags are going to take Georgia safety slot corner Tyke Smith at 81. He was more of a slot corner for Georgia, kind of played in a hybrid role in their defense. I think he's just a good defensive back that could potentially replace Rayshon Jenkins or maybe Trey Herndon in the slot. The best block shedding defensive back in this class. He just dominates blocks from tight ends. It's pretty incredible to watch. At 82, the Bengals are pulling the plug on the Cordell Volson experiment and taking Boston College guard Christian Mahogany, mauling run blocker with elite straight line power. He pretty much shut it down in the Senior Bowl in the one-on-one reps. Not the best lateral mover, but I think a clear upgrade to Volson. At 83, the Rams are going with Kentucky linebacker Trevin Wallace. He was 11th on Bruce Feldman's Freaks list. I think he has a lot of untapped potential. Former track star in high school. I think he still needs to improve his play recognition in the run game, but I expect him to go a lot higher than people are mocking him. The Steelers have the 84th pick. I've got the Bears trading up. They are going to give 90 and 104 for 84 and 120, and they're taking the last of this tier of edge rushers with Jonah Ellis out of Utah. He's kind of undersized. I wish he would have come back to school. He's got okay length, but he's 243 pounds. His dad is actually Utah's defensive line coach, and as you would expect, he's got a ton of pass rushing moves, really effective inside spin. You'll also see him win with the ghost move around the edge. That's why I comped him to Alex Highsmith, but sort of limited athletically, projects as more of a number 2 pass rusher, which is fine now that they have Montez Sweat. At 85, the Texans are going to take Auburn cornerback DJ James. He's a really fluid mover, good speed, but 170 pounds. This is about as early as I can justify taking him. And then another trade up with the Browns at 86. The Chiefs are going to send 95 and 132, and they're going to take, hopefully, their Travis Kelce replacement in Jatavian Sanders, tight end out of Texas. He's 51st on the consensus board. There are some people that have him in the top 32, which I think is way too high. He just can't hold up as a run blocker, and he's billed as this elite athlete. I thought he just had good speed, very reliable hands, good focus in tight window situations, didn't have a single drop last year, and based on the way that he played, I would have expected him to weigh in a lot lower than 252, which he did at the Shrine Bowl. He didn't do any of the drills, which part of the weight is, seeing them move at that weight. So we'll see what that looks like at the combine. He isn't even 21 years old yet, so it'll be good to have him develop behind Travis Kelce. At 87, the Cowboys are going to take Texas running back Jonathan Brooks. Texas is just a running back factory nowadays. I have him as my RB2 right now just because his season ended with an ACL tear. If he was fully healthy, he would be my top ranked running back. The patience and vision is just so impressive, and he's got the power to win in between the tackles. That'll allow Tony Pollard to be more of a complimentary change of pace back. I've got Denver taking TCU cornerback Josh Newton, really aggressive press corner. He's one of the most recent players that I watched. It seems like most people are a lot lower on him than me. He had a rough game against Texas, but outside of that, I was really impressed with his tape. And then the Bucs need a strong safety to play opposite of Antoine Winfield Jr., assuming he comes back. I'm going to go with Oregon State safety Keaton Oladapo. He's one of my guys in this class. He's a big safety, really good straight line athlete. He's got the ball skills. He's a high effort player. You can look up his chase down forced fumble against Washington, but you definitely want Oladapo playing in the box. At 90, the Steelers are going to take Georgia center Cedric Van Pran. He's got a massive frame, really strong punch. When he gets his hands on you, the rep is pretty much over, and I think he's a pro-ready run blocker. His run blocking tape was just dominant this year, but I am slightly lower on him than consensus. He has stiff lateral movement skills, really struggles with cross-face moves, and in open space, if he's trying to block a linebacker at the second level and they change directions, he'll whiff on those blocks pretty frequently. We got the Packers at 91. They're going to take Jeremiah Trotter Jr., undersized, doesn't have elite speed, but he's a really smart player, quick play recognition as a run defender. He's got a good sense for routes that are developing behind him in zone coverage, and if he was bigger and faster, I think he'd be a second to maybe late first round type of prospect, but to me, he's a borderline top 100 guy. Also, watching his tape, the vast majority of his tackles were shoestring tackles, a lot of diving at the feet, kind of out of control. The Lions are going to take Clemson defensive lineman Rook Ororo to play opposite of Aleem McNeil. He's kind of undersized and not that productive, but I was really impressed with his balance and fluidity changing directions. And like we've been saying with defensive linemen, it's all about when they get their opportunities. When he was asked to just tee off and and rush the passer, he has a pretty diverse pass rushing skill set, so I think he could be more productive in the NFL. The Ravens really need a 3-down running back, so I'm going to take Trey Benson out of Florida State. He has the ideal size-speed combination, 0 career fumbles. He's very experienced in Florida State's scheme, running power and counter runs, does a great job setting up his blocks, and he has quick acceleration to hit the hole. He's a good receiving back. Outside of the Syracuse game, I think he had 3 drops in that game. One of them led to an interception, but outside of that, there weren't any drops in the games that I watched, so I trust that was just an outlier. And when he has to change directions, he can't just plant his foot in the ground and make a sharp cut. He kind of stumbles for a few steps. But with Jonathan Brooks' injury, I do have Trey Benson as my top ranked running back. At 94, I've got San Francisco going Oregon cornerback Kyrie Jackson, long press corner, good recovery speed, kind of stiff changing directions, but he can make up for some of that with his length. I've got the Browns taking Troy running back Kamani Vidal. I think he might be the most underrated player in this class. He's just under 5'8", but he weighs 215 pounds. He's a dog in pass protection. Really good contact balance. He ranked 2nd in college football last year with 94 missed tackles forced. I think he's the player in this class that no one's talking about that could go a lot higher than people are expecting. At 96, the Commanders are going to take Penn State tight end Theo Johnson. He's a true wide tight end. He can run block. He can be a red zone threat. He's got some good fluidity out of his breaks. I think he's just a well-rounded late 3rd to early 4th type of tight end. I've got the Jags going with Florida State defensive lineman Braden Fisk at 97. Really short arms, but he's so quick with his hands, he makes up for some of that length disadvantage, and he's more of a disruptive, penetrating 3 technique. The Cardinals are going to go with edge rusher / defensive lineman Brandon Dorlus out of Oregon. I don't really know what to do with him. I really like his tape, but he's kind of a tweener positionally. I don't think he's explosive enough to be a true speed rusher around the edge, but at 272 pounds, that's not really heavy enough to play 3 technique. In this universe, I'm drafting him in the late 3rd, having him add weight, and he's going to play 3 technique. He's got good length, fluid movement skills, and he's a really technically polished pass rusher, so I think there is a lot to work with there. And then the Vikings are going to trade up with the Bills to pick 99, sending 111 and 148, and they're going to take Spencer Rattler, South Carolina quarterback. He's got a strong arm, really concise throwing motion, quick release. Overall, he's a very accurate quarterback, and he's got some speed to run around and create outside of the pocket. That's what he was doing pretty much every play at South Carolina, but he doesn't have great size. The character concerns from that Netflix documentary seem to be kind of behind him at this point. Everyone at South Carolina seems to have great things to say about him. I actually watched like an hour-long interview with him, and he seemed like a normal, relatively humble guy, at least as humble as you could be for a starting college quarterback. I think that's probably just a byproduct of, every 18-year-old that's a 5-star on 24/7 is going to handle it differently, and he probably didn't handle it that well at first. But I think he has the traits to potentially be a quality starter, and he can develop behind Kirk Cousins for a couple years. And pick 100, final pick of the 3rd round, the 49ers are going to take Colorado State edge rusher Mohamed Kamara. He's such an interesting player. One of the most difficult players to come up with a comp for because he doesn't really fit into any archetype. He's short and stocky, but he's a speed rusher with really good bend to turn the corner. I was really impressed with his ability to continue to generate power as he pushed through that outside shoulder. He can really compress the pocket as he's flattening his angle. All right, on to the 4th round. The Panthers are going to take Ben Sinnott, tight end out of Kansas State. Apologies to Panthers fans for the Tommy Tremble comp there. It's more of what we thought Tommy Tremble could be as kind of an H-back hybrid tight end that's a good blocker, good receiver, does a little bit of everything. At 102, the Commanders are going to take Notre Dame right tackle Blake Fisher. He would be a top 100 player by the Kurt Benkert scouting method if you just looked at his highlights. He's got some dominant flashes. The Ohio State game I thought was his best tape of the season, but there are times where the technique just completely falls apart, so he is more of a project to me. At 103, kind of an an underrated need for the Patriots is a true rangy center fielding free safety. Right now they just have a lot of box guys. So I'm gonna go with Kalen Bullock out of USC. He's got high-end movement skills. He's a ball hawk, 9 interceptions, 15 pass breakups at USC, but a very skinny build. He's listed at 6'3", 195 pounds, and a terrible tackler. He's the opposite of a security blanket on the back end. I also thought his coverage discipline and route recognition were fairly inconsistent. I'm getting some pretty heavy JT Woods vibes with Kalen Bullock, but he definitely has the upside to be a true game changer, especially if he can add some weight. I've got the Steelers taking Missouri left tackle Javon Foster. He's a perfect fit for Arthur Smith's scheme, very experienced and productive blocking outside zone. He can pull off some incredible backside cutoffs, and he didn't allow much pressure in his last year at Missouri, but I do have some concerns with him in pass pro. I think he has somewhat limited pocket range, and he's very reliant on the two-hand strike, which is kind of an all or nothing way of pass blocking. At 105, the Chargers are going to take Notre Dame running back Audric Estime. Really good size and straight line speed, kind of a one-speed runner, not very fluid changing directions. He does have the best hurdle in this draft class though. I've got the Giants taking UCLA edge rusher Gabriel Murphy, kind of a difficult player to solidify my grade on. I thought his tape was excellent. He's just a slasher with a ton of different pass rushing moves. He uses those to defend the run and shed blocks, but he's got under 31-inch arms, which is 0.4 percentile for edge rushers. That's borderline disqualifying arm length. The Titans are going to take Michigan wide receiver Cornelius Johnson, Shrine Bowl standout. He was one of the 2 or 3 best receivers there, and I think he's one of the more underrated receivers in this class. Outside of Malik Neighbors and probably Ladd McConkey, he's the best decelerator in this class. He can reach top speed and then cut off a curl route instantly. He's got good size. He's a nuanced route runner. He led this draft class in contested catch rate, but he did have some drop issues and pretty small hands, which is a concern. I've got the Falcons taking Chris Abrams-Drain out of Missouri. I really like everything about Chris Abrams-Drain except for his size. 5'11", 173 pounds. It's just hard to play at that weight in the NFL, but he's a really smart, instinctive, twitchy cover corner, probably going to move into the slot. And then at 109, the Bears are finally going to take a receiver, Brendan Rice out of USC. I read, listened to, I consumed about every single piece of Senior Bowl winners and losers content on the internet. I think 50% of them had Brendan Rice as a winner, 50% had him as a loser. And for me, he kind of showed the opposite of what I thought he showed on tape at USC. I thought on tape he was a much more fluid route runner, but he really struggled winning at the catch point. And at the Senior Bowl, I thought he was clunky in and out of his breaks, but was really effective in contested catch situations. So shout out to Brendan Rice for creating another difficult evaluation. At 110, the Jets are going to take defensive tackle McKinley Jackson out of Texas A&M. He's going to be a nose tackle. I don't think he's going to give you much as a pass rusher, but he's got the ideal size, frame, build. Doesn't really get moved back at the point of attack. The Bills are going to take defensive lineman, defensive end, edge Justin Aboigbe out of Alabama. He's a very disruptive run defender. I thought he had outstanding tape this year. Showed some flashes as a pass rusher when he got his opportunities, although I think the upside there is somewhat limited. And then the Packers are going to take USC running back Marshawn Lloyd, 5'9", 217 pounds. That's the kind of build that I look for in a running back. He creates so much horizontal leverage with just one step. He's got pretty good top end speed, but he can come to a complete stop, make a violent jump cut, and make a defender miss in the open field. And then a very creative runner as far as reversing his path, creating something out of nothing. That does get him into trouble sometimes where he'll cut back into traffic. He does have 8 career fumbles though, so that's the biggest concern with Marshawn Lloyd. At 113, I've got the Raiders taking defensive lineman Dwayne Carter out of Duke. He's a player I definitely need to watch more tape on. I've watched 4 games of him up to this point, and I pretty much have different notes from every game. A couple tapes where he's just a wrecking ball, disruptive in the middle of the defense, and then sometimes he's getting moved back consistently. I thought his Senior Bowl performance was pretty underwhelming, but I know there's a lot of people that are a lot higher on him, so I'll definitely check out some more tape. Jacksonville is going to take Arkansas center Bo Limmer and send Luke Fortner center to guard, the bench, the XFL. There's a number of different options for him. Limmer had that one terrible rep against T'Vondre Sweat where he just got folded in half, but he actually won the majority of his one-on-one matchups. Really nuanced and patient hand usage in pass protection. He's a good run blocker, especially on zone runs, and he has experience at guard from last season, so there's some positional versatility there. At 115, the Vikings are going to take Oregon running back Bucky Irving. I think he's the most dynamic running back in this class. His creativity, his start-stop ability, the way that he can make defenders miss in the open field, I think is unrivaled. But my big hang-up with Bucky Irving, as dynamic as he is with the ball in his hands, he projects as more of a third down back, and he struggles in pass protection, so it could be hard for him to find a role. I've got the Patriots taking Florida State receiver Johnny Wilson, but I have him as a tight end on my board. I think he projects in that Mike Gesicki, Darren Waller role. For a receiver, he's a really good run blocker, not lacking for physicality at all, so if he adds some weight, I actually think he could play more of a traditional tight end role. But right now, I view him as a tight end, big slot hybrid, just an elite catch radius. He's got the longest arms for any receiver in combine history and 98th percentile arm length for tight ends. He can just pluck the ball out of the air. I mean, imagine him on the goal line against a 5'10 slot corner. It would be over before the ball was snapped. At 117, the Broncos are going to take Malachi Corley out of Western Kentucky. If you watch his Western Kentucky tape, he doesn't really run routes and he doesn't really face press coverage. Those are two of probably the four main traits / skills that you look for in a receiver, and those are unchecked boxes for Malachi Corley. I was hoping we'd get more of an answer at the Senior Bowl, but he looks about like what I expected. He's pretty unrefined, running a more traditional route tree. So many reps where he would just torpedo into the defender at the top of the route, not even try to create separation with his footwork. And he's good after the catch. He's got that running back build. The question with Malachi Corley is, will that be worth feeding him enough targets to justify the pick? I think if you just force-fed him 10 targets a game on drag routes and screens, he could be somewhat productive, but I'm not sure if the yak ability is special enough to justify such a high usage rate. But that's more of my argument against taking him top 60. I think in the 4th round, it's well worth the bet. At 118, I've got the Bengals taking Jaheim Bell out of Florida State. He's going to be more of a move second tight end, not a true Y that you want blocking defensive ends, although he is a high effort run blocker. When you get him out on the move blocking linebackers and DBs, he can be pretty effective in that area. And he doesn't really have elite traits as a receiver, but he's pretty good after the catch. He's got good straight line speed. He can route up linebackers pretty easily, and he weighed in at 244, which is about 15 to 20 pounds heavier than he was listed at Florida State. I've got the Steelers taking Notre Dame linebacker Maurice Liufau. Do not know how to pronounce his name. He's got the longest arms of anyone in this linebacker class. He's a productive blitzer, kind of a jack of all trades type of linebacker, more of a developmental pick, but he's still a smart player, got some good coverage instincts. So I think there's a lot to work with there, even if he isn't ready day one. And then the Bears just released Eddie Jackson as I was recording this, so perfect timing. I'm gonna have them take Utah safety Cole Bishop. He's another player that I want to go back to his tape because I could be even higher on him than I am right now. I thought everything he did on the field was really impressive, but he looked like more of a decent athlete, so I thought there were some limitations there. Watching him at the Senior Bowl, he was one of the most impressive safeties on the field, and I want to check out some more games to see if there's more positional versatility. I could see him being a 3rd round grade for me. The Broncos are picking at 121. We're going to do their 3rd trade down of this mock draft, I just realized, with the Patriots. New England's giving 140 and 181, and the Broncos are giving 121 and 233. And I've got New England taking Tulane quarterback Michael Pratt. He's a day one ready starter, assuming they're done with Mac Jones, drafting him more as a bridge quarterback to get them through this year, and maybe he develops into something. He's accurate, he's got good mobility, he's a good processor, decent arm strength. I was really impressed with some of his anticipation throws over the middle. He had some crazy examples on tape of like looking off the safety, making a no-look throw. I don't think there's much crazy upside with him, but this is more of just plugging a hole. I've got the Bears taking Clemson defensive lineman lineman Tyler Davis at 122. Last year, they took a couple raw, developmental, athletic 3 technique types, and Tyler Davis is more of a finished product, high caliber run defender that doesn't give you much as a pass rusher. For the Texans at 123, I'm taking Mason McCormick, South Dakota State guard. He has a great build for a guard, almost 34-inch arms. I thought he was South Dakota State's best run blocker on tape, cleared the way for a lot of Isaiah Davis's biggest runs. And at the Shrine Bowl, it was between him and Christian Mahogany for the best pass protector in the one-on-ones. He's got the neck roll, he's got the nasty, mean streak finishing demeanor that you look for. If he tests well at the combine, I could actually see him sneaking into the 3rd round. For the Cowboys at 24, they should take another swing at left tackle to try to prepare for life after Tyron Smith. I think Oklahoma left tackle Walter Roos might be the 2nd most underrated player, probably to Kamani Vidal. Watching Tyler Guyton's tape, I thought Walter Roos was actually the better college left tackle like right now. Obviously, Guyton has more projectable NFL traits, but Walter Roos has over 35-inch arms. He didn't allow a single sack this year, only 6 pressures. Maybe he doesn't have elite movement skills, but I think he is pretty refined as far as hand usage. He had a rep against, I'm pretty sure it was Texas. It was on the last play of the game. Oklahoma threw the game-winning touchdown, and he was blocking 2 players off the edge at the same time to give Dylan Gabriel enough time to get rid of the ball. Green Bay's picking at 125. I'm going to have the Browns trade up and send 138 and 205 to take Texas linebacker Jalen Ford. They need a linebacker. They've got Anthony Walker hitting free agency, Sione Takitaki, Jacob Phillips, all free agents this year. Jalen Ford has prototypical size and length for a Mike linebacker, really stiff punch, heavy hands playing off of blocks, and he's kind of just a thumper in between the tackles. He does have some limitations in coverage. That's why I've got a 5th round grade on him. And I thought his range flowing with outside runs was just average, but he's an experienced player. I think high floor, low ceiling. Tampa Bay could use another outside corner with some inconsistent play from Jamel Dean and Carlton Davis this past year. So I'm going to take Wake Forest corner Kalen Carson. I was a lot higher on him coming into the year. I do think he has high-end athletic traits, and he's a really aggressive and I think versatile defensive back, could play slot, could play on the outside. He's just kind of inconsistent from a technique standpoint, kind of all over the place, like playing with the wrong leverage. Sometimes he's really sticky in man coverage. Sometimes he's jumpy at the route break, allows a lot of separation. And I'm kind of concerned about his ball skills and his ability to turn and locate the football. I started out with a 3rd round grade on him, but every tape that I watch, I'm kind of lowering his grade a little bit. And then at 127, the Texans are going to add another safety, Bo Braid out of Maryland. He's another player that I had a 3rd round grade on heading into the year and after watching like the first 4 games of the season. But with every tape that I watched, I just had more concerns about his tackling consistency and his over aggressiveness and discipline and coverage. I still think he has a lot going for him and can be an impactful kind of tone setter in the middle of your defense, but some underwhelming tape, and I thought a disappointing Senior Bowl definitely has him falling on my board. I've got the Bills taking Troy edge rusher Javon Solomon. He was a Senior Bowl participant, pretty crazy measurement profile, just over 6 foot, which is 1st percentile for edge rushers, but he's got really long arms, massive hands. That's kind of the perfect profile for a power rusher because he has the length to establish first contact. He can get lower than the offensive lineman, and he has a really explosive first step. You saw that translate to the tape a lot more against Sun Belt competition. He had 17 sacks this year, but then he was pretty ineffective at the Senior Bowl. I view him as a high upside developmental pass rusher that's probably not going to offer much in the run game, but in a couple years, he could develop into a weapon on 3rd downs. For the Vikings at 129, I'm going to add some interior offensive line depth and take Michigan guard Zach Zinter. He went out with a season-ending injury in the Ohio State game. I thought he had solid tape. His main issue is lateral recovery skills, and then the injury also dropped him a little bit on my board, but he's the best player available, and he could be a replacement for Dalton Reisner. At 130, I've got the Ravens taking slot corner Mikey Sainristil out of Michigan. I do think he's one of the more overrated players in this class. He's a very hard-hitting DB. He's got a lot of highlight plays on national television. He can drive on those underneath routes from off coverage, lay a huge hit. Always seems to happen in big moments too. And then he's got good eyes in zone coverage, 6 interceptions this year. a lot of them were kind of just tossed right to him. He kind of had some gimme interceptions that I feel like most college defensive backs would have brought in, and he's physical and aggressive in run defense, so I see what people like in him, but he's undersized and he just cannot mirror receivers in man coverage. He's going to have to be kind of a zone corner that's playing that star role. You don't want him matched up with a shifty slot receiver. He can't really play press, and I think he has average recovery speed. He's a talented enough defensive back with great instincts that I'm comfortable taking him in the 4th round, but I think 2nd to 3rd round is way too rich for Mikey Sainristil. For San Francisco at 131, I decided to go with another offensive lineman and take guard Isaiah Adams. He plays right tackle for Illinois, but I think he's definitely going to be a guard convert. That's where he was working at the Senior Bowl. Now that I'm recording this, I could definitely see the argument for going with a linebacker here, considering Dre Greenlaw's injury and the fact that he's probably going to miss part of the start to next season. So if they wanted to go with a linebacker, my pick would be Tyron Hopper out of Missouri. But for this mock, we're going with Isaiah Adams, mauling run blocker. I think really talented in pass pro, but just lacks some pocket range where he definitely has to move inside. But good size, lots of experience. I think most of his issues can be mitigated on the inside. Another tackle to guard convert at 132. I've got the Browns taking Delmar Glaze out of Maryland. He's 6'4", 323, over 34-inch arms, has the perfect build for a guard. He has a really strong anchor, almost never lost to power from the games that I watched on tape. I was watching the Ohio State game. That was definitely his most impressive tape. I thought he could be like a top 60 type of player, but then I watched the Penn State game and his lack of range and ability to block speed rushers around the edge really got exposed. I think it was Abdul Carter. It was someone who's not in this class, was just working him. But he's really patient and balanced in pass protection, does a great job with his hands. Another example of how length isn't always the most important thing for a tackle to guard, convert conversations. The more common issue for me is foot speed and pocket range. I think a move to guard would be perfect for Delmar Glaze. Final trade of the mock draft. The Cardinals are at 133. I've got the Chargers trading 142 and 226 to come up and take a Corey Linsley replacement in Florida center Kingsley Eguakon. He's exactly the type of run blocker that Jim Harbaugh is going to want on his offensive line. Just physicality, movement skills, flashes of technique. He's really effective blocking outside zone. In pass pro, he's a little bit more up and down. You see some dominant wins where he can just slam a bull rush into the ground or do a great job resetting his hands, but he'll also gamble and overextend. That can result in some pretty bad losses. So I think he's more developmental. He has the traits to me to be a 1st round pick, but it's not all there from a technique standpoint. The Saints are going to take Kentucky cornerback Andrew Phillips at 134. His tape and coverage I thought was excellent, and then he was one of the best performers at the Senior Bowl, went 5 for 5 on the one-on-one reps, 2 for 2 against Lad McConkey. I think borderline special ability to turn and locate the football when he's at top speed running down the sideline. What's keeping him out of the top 100 for me is just tackling inconsistency. In the NFL, at corner, you've got to be able to tackle or teams are just going to attack you and exploit you. For the Eagles, we addressed most of the major defensive needs. Now we're going to go to the offensive side of the ball and take slot receiver Malik Washington out of Virginia. He and Cornelius Johnson I thought were the 2 most impressive receivers at the Shrine Bowl. He's 5'8", 192, so not great size, but he's a shifty route runner. He's productive after the catch, and even though he is undersized, 65% contested catch rate. He's shown the ability to go up and high point the ball, punch above his weight class. There's a lot of interesting day 3 slot receivers, but I think Malik Washington, for me, has established himself as the top of that group. The Packers are picking at 136. And they're one of the few teams that I think can afford to take a gamble on someone like Sion Vaki out of Utah. He's a box safety, but he also plays running back. He's got really good straight line speed. Like if you could get him in a defensive scheme where all he had to do is just crash on underneath routes from depth and move in a straight line, I think that would be a perfect fit. He struggles to break down in open space and change directions. He's a very aggressive, hard hitter, but he's not the most consistent tackler. And he did a Mormon mission trip, so he's actually a pretty inexperienced player. You see that with his zone coverage eyes. He doesn't have the best route recognition, but with how many picks Green Bay has and relatively few needs, I think they can afford to take Sion Vaki here. We address the other safety spot. They can probably add someone in free agency. You've got Anthony Johnson Jr., who I think has some upside, and Sion Vaki can be more of a developmental player, maybe even an offensive weapon in some special packages. And then final pick, can't believe we made it, 137. I've got the Baltimore Ravens taking Florida Atlantic nose tackle Evan Anderson. He's going to be the Michael Pierce replacement. Immovable in the run game. He was listed at like 350 pounds at Florida Atlantic, 320 at the Shrine Bowl. Not only is he a massive human, he's also really technically sound with his hand placement and his anchor footwork in run defense. And as a pass rusher, based on his college tape, I would say he's someone that gets after it. Like, he had some flashes of production here and there, but he doesn't really have the traits or the explosiveness or quickness, I think, to project as too much in that area. But just a solid plug and play run stopping nose tackle for the Ravens. This is assuming that they re-signed Justin Madubuike to be more of their pass rushing 3 technique. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments any NFL draft prospects that you'd like me to cover. And if you want to see my full draft board as an interactive filterable table, I've got that up at A to Z sports.com. The link to that is in the description.